in drawing another map.
The minority leader of the House of Representatives, delegated by the Speaker, leads the debate and moves a motion during Wednesday's plenary session for the second reading of a bill which seeks to ensure that 40% of the nation's annual budget is allocated to capital projects.
What this bill is trying to do is to correct that abnormalities, where in a situation capital projects are kind of sidelined or neglected.
The bill, which is sponsored by the Speaker of the House, targets increasing GDP, stimulation of the economy, among others.
In providing infrastructure, it has a lot of multiplier effect, because when you provide power infrastructure, companies will come up and our younger youth will get employment. If you provide good roads, our agricultural produce can move to where they can be sold.
There must be enough money to spend for infrastructures in our country. And to that extent, 40% is a good starting point, such that any government that comes into power will know that 40% is 40%. So there's nothing like tampering with it, backward or forward.
The Speaker believes that the numerous abandoned projects in the country could be blamed on the poor allocation to capital projects over the years.
There's no way I know how you can send in such sums for budget and expect that the projects will be completed. Let's remember that it's a 10-year, almost like an experimental thing, subject to review after 10 years.
The bulk of the country's budget in the years past have been largely consumed by recurrent expenditure and debt servicing, which do not contribute to the economic growth of any nation. However, while the lawmakers call for increased capital expenditure, it is also important to harp on the need for revenue generation to fund the budget, and also cutting down the cost of governance in all aspects, which makes up the recurrent expenditure in the annual budget. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Well, clearly, that's where we're going now. Just yesterday, we were talking about the budget, and we're talking about tax regime. The day before, we're talking about the budget and how that it's working, and we need to block wastages and all of that. That's one of the things that the Senate Committee on Public Accounts champions, just to ensure that our money, the little that we have, works far more effectively than many would have guessed. And that's why we have the Chairman, Senate Public Accounts Committee, in the person of Senator Matthew Urogide. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Senator. We know that your work is not easy, especially when you have to check the books all of the time. Maybe we should even ask you, how far so far? How easy is it to do what you do, check the books of the public accounts?
Thank you very much, Ayo. And, of course, thank you for having me. Let me say that the Public Accounts Committee of the Senate is one of the special committees of the Senate. And, of course, its mandate is very clear, as provided for in the Constitution of 1999 of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended. And, of course, the Senate standing rules, Section 97, subsection 5. And, of course, what the Public Accounts Committee has to do is, first, when it comes to the side of expenditure, to ensure that there is transparency, there is accountability and economy in spending public funds. Of course, the committee, too, if you look at Section 85, which has to do with the office and function of the Auditor General for the Federation, it is a Public Accounts Committee that, looks at the audited accounts of the Federation as submitted by the Auditor General for the Federation to the National Assembly, which is in turn sent to the Public Accounts Committee of the Senate. The same thing, operates in the House of Representatives. Well, as the functions, clearly state, we are charged with responsibility, first line, function of ensuring that, all agencies of government that are revenue generating, turn in, the resources or the funds that we need to operate our budgets. And then, of course, when these funds are being allocated, to different sectors, those funds are properly used or properly utilized. And, of course, it's a very huge responsibility because the agencies of government that are concerned with this are in excess of 600 agencies of government. And, of course, having to look at, their books, on the side of revenue and expenditure, and then, of course, having to look at, value for money, at the same time, I think it's quite a huge task. And when you look at that, against the backdrop of the reports that are turned in every year, of the accounts of the Federation for all these agencies of government, that is ministry departments and agencies of government, including courts and foreign missions, you will see that having to evaluate all those reports, and turn them in again back to National Assembly, that is plenary, is quite huge. But it's challenging. We're up to it.
Well, we know that you are up to it. I'm sure that's why, you got to be chairman of that committee. But then there's this report that I'm very sure you're aware of, which you've also made reference to. It's a 2016 audited report of the Auditor General's, from the Auditor General's office that indicted very, very many ministries, departments, and agencies. And I saw a few figures, and some of them running into hundreds of millions. In fact, there was one I saw yesterday, over 1.2 billion naira. That's the Auditor General is asking that the chairman or the director generals or heads of those ministries, departments, or agencies should account for or find a way to return. Who executes the recommendations of the Auditor General's report? And with all the damning reports, we haven't heard anyone, apprehended or asked questions or probed about, what's happening.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me say that, when these reports, are turned into National Assembly, and then, of course, forwarded to Public Accounts Committee, of the Senate and, of course, the House of Representatives, it is there that, those agencies that have been indicted, for different infractions, are called, to what we call public hearing now, where the Auditor General sits down, and then, of course, the committee sits down, that is Public Accounts Committee sits down, and we confront them, with these observations, that have been made by the Auditor General for the Federation. And then, of course, they have to explain, what happened. Particularly when, of course, payments are made, against advice, or auditors' advice. And when those ones are done, the Auditor General now gets this report. He sends it to us. And then we call these agencies to come on account. In fact, just what you mentioned now, even though the reports don't come in very quickly because, of the handicap, that the Auditor General too has in his office. But when they come in, we consult ourselves because it's quite a laborious, job. It's very voluminous. This agency will take them one by one. And we look at these queries that have been, raised, against them. Over the years, we have had a lot of these, reports, coming to the National Assembly, and each time we look at these reports, recommendations too are made, or reports are sent to plenary, for consideration. In our circumstance, what we have observed over the years is not the few ones that you have just mentioned. Many of the agencies of government really do not have, their accounts audited. That is the problem. And it will be surprising, for you to note that, there are some agencies right from inception of about 10 years or so really have never audited their accounts. And that is quite worrisome. So when we do status inquiry, about the audited accounts of these agencies, and the Auditor General now tells us that these agencies, have not turned their audited reports, then it becomes worrisome. Against the background that most of these agencies, in their own establishment acts, that is the law establishing them. It's very clear that if you go and look at the article under audit, it is there that 6 months into the new financial year, all agencies of government must turn in their audited accounts before the other year. So in which case, before the allocated funds in the budget, in the succeeding year, all the accounts, all the audited accounts in the preceding year would have been turned into the, Office of Auditor General. But the provision is very clear in the Constitution. Yes, it's not the Auditor General that goes to, audit these accounts. It is what he does is that external auditors go to audit these accounts of these agencies, and then send them in, to the Auditor General. Then they are vetted, and by the time they are vetted, these comments are put on the observations and they are sent to the National Assembly, and it comes to us. Right. Well, that again, what happens after the National Assembly sends its report to the executive, what happens subsequently against other problem. That is why, the Audit Act that we have had over the years, which was, of course, Act of 1956, which is still existent, in our country, is quite obsolete. And its provisions really are not in tune, with contemporary happenings, in our country. Well, you are aware that the 8th Senate or the 8th National Assembly, passed the audit bill, which was, of course, was sent to Mr. President for assent. But, today it has not been assented to. By the time it's assented to, what is expected, according to the provisions of Section 85 of the Constitution, we're able to achieve them. And then, of course, all these erring agencies, that are in the habit, of not accounting for public funds, of course, were brought to book. And, of course, with all the provisions in the new bill that has been passed, I think it will serve as a deterrent so that there is transparency, accountability, and, of course, economic public spending. And, of course, collection to funds, which, of course, is very highly desirous for us to be able to execute, our budget.
Senator, some would say, that this report that we are talking about is for the 2016, is from 2016, Auditor General's report of 2016. If nothing has been done about that 2016 report, we are in 2019. If there is no deterrence, some are going to tell you that, look, if we do not punish, offenses that have been committed, it's impunity, and it is going to continue. The budget leakages are going to continue. We will not be able to block loopholes, and as you mentioned, we will not be able to get value for money. So how long is it going to take before we block these leakages, before we punish offenders, and make sure that our money actually works for us, as we expect?
Now, you are just talking of 2016. We have always had backlogs, over the time. Just like I said, the report that you probably read, 2016 came to the National Assembly, very late part of the 8th Senate, or the 8th National Assembly, and then the one for 2017 just came in. It is not how they come. I mean, if we have had backlog of 2012, 2014, and 2015, 2016. In fact, we are considering 2015 now. We want to try to finish the work 2015. Then we'll move to 2017. The backlog has always been there, and that's what I'm saying. The agents of government too, it is the ones that they send, to the general that they send to us. Many of them that do not send in their audited accounts, to General for the Federation. I mean, those ones are still there. So because we have always had backlog, we now continue to consider them, 1 year after the other until we're able to clear the backlog. That is the true position.
Now, one specific issue that brought up this conversation about transparency, spending public funds and, utilization was that statement the president made last week about constituency project. And I recall that he said that over 1 trillion naira has been appropriated for constituency projects with little to show for it. Now, when he made that statement, he didn't mention names. He didn't mention the National Assembly or the executive or even the contractors. But we know how the National Assembly responded, to that particular statement. So on one hand, I'd like to find out, are you following that money, especially now that the president has said, a lot has been appropriated, they say about 50% was released. But are you following that? And, I mean, why did the National Assembly respond in that manner?
Well, you see, oftentimes, when statements are made, in our country, by different arms of government, I think the whole idea really is not to be confrontational, or to put things in public domain, that can, elicit the type of, negative discourse. And, if since the advent of the Fourth Republic, 1999, or, for the past, 10 years or so, I would say 1 trillion naira has been allocated to, constituency projects, and that there's nothing to show for it. I don't think that is absolutely correct. I, for one, I want to say, in my constituency, what my constituents have is constituency projects. We don't have any rail line, in the South Central district where I come from, and there's no other presence, But of course, I'll be able to put constituency projects, in the community that produces the highest quantum of oil in my state. That is Obe, local government area. That community has never seen federal presence. The community has never seen local government presence or state government presence. So to go there and put 6 classrooms for primary school and 6 classrooms for secondary school, which is the only thing they have, it came by way of my constituency project. If I go to Eho, that is, who the local government, when in 2015 I was campaigning, and a young lady came and said that before we move from Eho to Irua, specialist hospital, a lot of us die on the way, particularly when, we start having the pangs, delivery, after midnight. So I went there through my constituency project, which was mediated through the Ministry of Nigeria Data Affairs to build the mentality.
Could you give us
there.
a few moments? Let's take some messages. When we come back, we'll be able to wrap this up in about 5 minutes. Please stay with us. Our final moments with Senator Matthew Orodige. Just quickly address this with us, Senator. For us, Senator, the federal audit bill has been in contention since the 8th Assembly, and we understand that you are also, your committee is also working with your counterparts in the House of Representatives, as well as some civil society organizations, to put this into the works. How far with that bill, and how strong do you think it will help in this whole process of transparency and accountability?
Thank you very much. First, the need, for us really to update, our legislation, about, public audits, or audit of, all our agencies, that we ensure transparency. For that bill to be assented to by Mr. President, really cannot be overemphasized. It is very important, if really we are serious, about fighting corruption in Nigeria. You recall that bill actually emanated, from the House of Representatives in 2015. And then, of course, after it was passed around in 2016, early 2017, it was now sent to the Senate for concurrence. Of course, we went through the gamut of having to, take it through the stage of legislation. And, of course, in late 2017, early 2018, that bill was passed. Unfortunately, to date, the president has not assented to it. Maybe, I think that one can readily adduce that to the fact that, the need for it, to quickly come into existence, to check, to check all of these, malfeasance that we see, in public finance and, of course, in public accounts, we know it too that if the president really is aware of the details, of that bill, certainly, because of his posture, very strong posture against corruption in our country, against corruption in our systems, of course, he will assent to that bill. And we are still waiting, because everybody is still waiting, particularly all the institutions, that have equally helped us, the DFID, and all of them, the World Bank that have been helping us. They too want, our, public finance, to really come, into proper, perspective and the practice, that obtains all over the world, where, of course, public spending, public resources, are properly monitored. So we are just hopeful that Mr. President, will see, to that bill. If that bill is not assented to, just like once one assembly goes, with a piece of legislation that is not assented to, it naturally dies. Then, of course, it has to come up again. So we're just waiting, and by the time we are a bit satisfied with that, we are going to reintroduce the bill and, quickly pass it again for Mr. President, just like we were talking about the Electoral Act too.
Okay, this one last one is from the Auditor General himself, Mr. Anthony Ayine, who suggested something to your committee as well as that in the House of Representatives. He says, and I quote, "Where accounting officers fail to respond to audit queries, the implication is that they have no explanation to offer. They should be compelled by the Public Accounts Committees to comply with the audit recommendations on such issues." Are you planning to do that?
Yes, very well. Quite frankly, the Auditor General for the Federation works, very, very closely, Public Accounts Committee. By the provisions, the articles of the Constitution, and then our own standing rules, in the Senate. The office of Auditor General really is the only office that Public Accounts Superintendent oversights. So we work very closely. That statement he made is very true. And just like I said, we work together. When we are considering his report, it sits next, to us in the committee, where we confront the agencies, of all, observed, malfeasance and all of that. So what he has said is correct. And it's our responsibility, really, by the time we find out from these errant agencies, we submit the report to get to plenary. It is what the plenary decides, that is sent to the executive. So you'll find out that ultimately, punishments or reprisals that have to be meted out to, erring, officials, agencies of government, still rest with the executive. And that is why we are saying if the bill is accepted to, there are serious consequences, that have been, earmarked, in the bill. Once it becomes law, all these, observed, nonsense, of course, we stop. Because right now, the way it is, nothing happens. Nothing happens to anybody. Because the present law really does not apply very, strictly to our contemporary situation. And again, other acts that we have, like the Fiscal Responsibility Act, if you look at its provision in Section 2, subsection 3, that when somebody is, in any financial transactions on behalf of government, that thing, is sent to the Attorney General for the Federation. We know how that one happens. When there is no commission that is in place, the Fiscal Responsibility Commission that is provided for in that act is not in place. So you'll find out that all these ones are leakages. And this is what these, government officials, just hang on. So if you come to, financial regulation, which is another, statute that we use, there are still provisions that are not very stringent, that will serve as deterrent. So now with the bill, once the president assents to it, there are serious consequences that are jail term for individuals, and then of course for agencies of government, that are not sending their audited reports, and then of course that have a field day doing whatever they like now. I think many of them will be brought to book. I just want to quickly say, we have been asking for a lot of things. You know it, because I think your station and some others covered, what we had about 2 weeks ago. We have given a whole lot of ultimatum, which expired yesterday, to government agencies to turn in information. We want to know, we are doing status inquiry. Said those, we want to know what came into your purse as revenue. And then the one you were allocated as appropriation, what do you do with it? Many of them have not sent these things in. And these are big spenders of public funds. So when that bill is assented by Mr. President, I think a lot of these, malfeasance will just stop.
Well, again, it underscores how much work your committee has to do, even though you have been doing a lot. We want to thank you very much for being our guest this morning. Senate Accounts Committee Chairman, Senator Matthew Urodege, thank you so much for your time.